Hello everyone. In this video, I am excited to share a surprising truth about myself that I've kept under wraps for quite some time. My name is Sophia Bennett, and I am 28 years old. 3 years ago, I found myself residing in a suburban house in Wisconsin. Having just married Ethan Cole, I believed that this union would usher in a profound sense of happiness. Especially considering David is 7 years my senior. He is more composed and accomplished than I am, working as a technology engineer, a role that demands intense focus and frequent long business trips. This is also why he is often away from home, leaving me alone in our spacious house. Despite having everything, a sense of emptiness and loneliness has taken root within me, enveloping me in an overwhelming depression. In the early days of our marriage, everything felt so sweet. David took care of me in every little way, knowing how to make me laugh and always showing he cared and listened. But those days slipped away faster than I imagined. His work demanded more of his time, and each extended business trip drew us further apart. At first, I simply missed him, yearning for the moments when he was home so we could be close. Yet, gradually, that longing morphed into dissatisfaction. I felt forgotten, as if I no longer held significance in his life. David began leaving for work early and returning late. When he finally came home, instead of spending time with me, he would sit in front of his laptop, eyes fixed on the screen as if nothing else mattered. Our conversations became scarce, and when they did happen, they were brief and formal. In our conversations, I sensed a gradual distancing, as if I were merely an ornament in the expansive home we shared. The absence of affection left me feeling hollow. Hugs and kisses gradually became less frequent. I tried to create moments to be closer to him, but David always made excuses about being tired after a long day of work or needing to finish urgent tasks. The long nights lying next to him without a single touch made me feel abandoned, as if I were no longer his wife. There was no denying it, the lack of sex and intimacy was unbearable. I began to crave release, to crave someone to fill the void inside me. Every time I looked at him sitting there, I wondered if he still loved me, if he recognized the needs I was silently screaming for. My mother-in-law, Margaret Blake, often brought up the issue of children as if it were the only thing that needed to be solved to make our marriage perfect. Every time she came over, questions about whether I was pregnant were asked. Her eyes filled with longing and disappointment. I felt more pressure, not only from the lack of connection in our marriage but also from the expectation of having children. In fact, we tried many times, but the lack of children only made the relationship between David and me more tense. I knew David wanted children, but his constant absence from home and his lack of focus on sex made it seem like a responsibility rather than something he really cared about. Every time she came over, questions about whether I was pregnant were asked, and her eyes were filled with longing and disappointment. I felt more pressure not only from the lack of marriage but also from the expectation of having children. In fact, we tried many times, but the lack of children only made the relationship between David and me more tense. I knew David wanted children, but his constant absence from home and his lack of focus on sex made it seem like a responsibility rather than something he really cared about. It made me feel vulnerable, as if everything I tried was not enough to keep his attention. Gradually, my sexual needs became stronger than ever, like an addiction that I could not control. I did not dare to tell anyone about this, nor did I dare to confront the reality that I was ensnared in a cycle of longings that David could never fulfill. Each time I attempted to bridge the gap between us, his coldness left me feeling small and powerless. I began to question my own attractiveness, allowing those negative thoughts to seep in and take hold. Yet, amidst this turmoil, I yearned for solace. Every night, as I lay beside David, I reached out, hoping to forge some semblance of connection. But he would merely pass by, as if I were invisible. His indifference slowly unraveled me, and I found myself at a loss, unsure of how to salvage our marriage and escape the suffocating loneliness within me. A strength emerged one night as the stillness of the vast house deepened. In the dark and cold space outside, the air inside the house was stifling even though it was just me and Victor Harrington. The cold from outside penetrated my skin, forcing me to pull the blanket around me as I sat in front of the TV screen. But the cold outside was nothing compared to the restlessness simmering inside me. The TV program was playing, but I could no longer clearly perceive the content because Victor Harrington's eyes had made me fall into another strange world and uneasy when he walked in. He walked slowly as usual, but his silence and gaze made it impossible for me not to pay attention. He sat down next to me, his eyes fixed on me, not leaving me even for a moment. It was not the normal gaze of a father-in-law, but something deeper, darker. As if he was examining me, exploring every corner of my soul. Without any words, a feeling of horror slowly rose in my heart, making every muscle tense, my heart pounding as if wanting to run away from what was about to happen. Although I could not determine what it was, the distance between us was closer than ever. Not in space, but in feeling. The silence between the two of us was like a thin, hazy curtain, but choking on my every breath. I felt like everything in the room was pressing down on me, making the atmosphere even more gloomy and stifling. Victor Harrington's eyes were no longer the familiar gaze of a gentle father, but sharp and haunting, like a dangerous undercurrent beneath the calm exterior. While I tried to stay calm, tried to regulate my breathing to cover up the anxiety that was gradually overwhelming, everything seemed to become more difficult. For my hands unconsciously tightened the corner of the blanket, creating small but clear wrinkles and movements in the suffocating silence. With each passing moment, I clearly felt myself being sucked into a vortex of chaotic emotions, the key point of which was the man sitting next to me. The tension gradually turned into an invisible fear, seeping through every muscle, every thought in my head. I knew something was changing, something beyond my control. It felt like the room and everything around me was waiting for something to happen. Is inevitable transformation. Thoughts began to run wild in my head, terrifying scenarios playing out before my eyes. But I didn't dare to think further. All I knew was that Victor Harrington's presence, the way he looked at me, and the awkward silence between us did not bode well. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine as Victor Harrington moved closer. So close it was as if he could feel my every breath. I felt immobilized, frozen in place. I felt as though his gaze had rendered me immobile, an unfamiliar dread creeping through my body from my fingertips to my toes. Every instinct was stifled by the overwhelming sensation that something dreadful loomed on the horizon. Martin leaned in, his voice deliberate and measured, each syllable piercing my heart like a knife, suffocating me. He spoke of my solitude, of David's failure to meet his obligations. Those words not only stunned me but also obliterated any remaining trust one had in this family. The atmosphere thickened with an oppressive silence after his declaration, leaving only the frantic rhythm of my own breath reverberating in my mind. I felt my heart stop, my body freeze. And in that moment, I could only sit still, completely numb to what was unfolding. A shiver ran down my spine as I grasped the weight of his suggestion. It was not merely a casual remark or an error. He was fully aware of his intentions, and the way he articulated it revealed a calculated purpose. Fear surged through me, overwhelming my thoughts and instincts like a relentless wave, drowning everything in its path. I yearned to rise, to escape this room, to flee from those invasive gazes and those repugnant words. Yet my legs remained anchored to the chair. The grip of fear felt like an invisible tether, binding me, preventing any movement, stifling my resistance. I gazed at Victor Harrington, his eyes gleaming with expectation, fixed on me as though he awaited my response. And I felt cornered. In that gaze, trapped and ensnared. A part of me yearned to scream, to unleash a cry that would shatter this oppressive silence. Yet my voice remained locked away, silent and unyielding. I was uncertain about the source of my fear, More fear of him or fear of what was rising inside me, because in that moment I couldn't deny that there was a part of me deep and suppressed for so long that was stirred by that offer, the loneliness that I had tried to hide for so long, the silent desires that had been suppressed. All of it was suddenly disturbed by every word Victor Harrington spoke, seemed to awaken emotions I had tried to. I couldn't deny that for a very brief moment I felt the excitement of his offer. That feeling left me more confused and bewildered than ever. It terrified me. How could I feel like this? How could I be attracted to something so wrong? I wanted to push the thought away immediately, to return to reason, to the values I believed in, but the addiction inside me, that long suppressed part, was not easily extinguished. It was not simply a physical desire, but a thirst for attention, for release from the emptiness of my current life. In my mind, a jumble of fear and desire, reason and instinct. Part of me screamed that this was wrong, that I couldn't let myself be drawn into this terrible temptation, but the other part, though I didn't want to admit it, was drawn to the prospect of being freed from the addiction I'd been living with for so long. The tug of war was unsettling, my heart pounding so fast I could hear it in my chest. Everything around me was spinning, and I felt like I was on the brink of a life-changing decision, the feeling that my world had been irrevocably turned upside down, that after this moment nothing would ever be the same again. With that offer, invisible line between me and Martin had been broken. Our relationship was no longer simply that of a daughter-in-law and father-in-law, but had now turned into something darker, more complicated, and sinful. At first, I wanted to refuse, wanted to walk away from the temptation he placed before me, but some force within me stopped me. The long suppressed desires, the loneliness I had endured during the long period of not being able to have closeness and love from David, which all forced me into the wrong decision whenever David was away on long business trips. The large house became the stage for my betrayal with Martin. We were furtive each time, despite the fleeting escape from the overwhelming loneliness and yearning that enveloped me. I recognized the wrongness of my actions and the betrayal of my husband's trust, who remained oblivious to the turmoil brewing behind his back. Each time I resolved to end it, to declare that this would be the final instance. A deep-seated part of me was irresistibly drawn into the shadows. I found myself unable to halt the descent into this spiral, fully cognizant of the repercussions. The moments we shared were cloaked in obscurity, hidden away in a locked room, during hurried encounters when no one else was present. Silence and darkness became our accomplices, shielding the secrets that were forbidden to be revealed. Yet I knew that darkness could also turn against me. With each encounter, guilt envelopes me, intensifying the ache within my heart. The fleeting moments of passion serve only as a temporary balm, masking the anguish that awaits me in the aftermath. My heart feels weighed down, as if an unseen force constricts every breath I take. Guilt surges relentlessly, drawing me deeper into despair, particularly when David returns home, leaving me unable to meet his gaze. He remains the good husband, the man I once loved and married. Yet that love is now marred by mistakes I cannot undo. I found myself avoiding him, as every glance and gesture served as a reminder of the betrayal I concealed. I attempted to act as if nothing had transpired, but the insecurity within me was undeniable. Each time he returned home, each embrace felt less like comfort and more like an unsettling distance, suffocating me in its grip. As I struggled to overcome my feelings, I increasingly felt like a traitor, a woman unworthy of the love and trust David had bestowed upon me. Despite my awareness of the destruction I was causing in my own life, I lacked the strength to break free from the relentless cycle of lies and desire. Our secret relationship persisted, a vicious and wrongful loop that I couldn't escape. No matter how many promises I made to myself that it would end, I understood it couldn't last. Each moment spent together only drew me further away from redemption. Then Martin entered the picture, and with every appearance, I found myself caught in an uncontrollable whirlwind, his charm eclipsing everything else. Rational thought eluded me as I succumbed to the overwhelming emotions that surged whenever we were together. The guilt gnawed at me relentlessly, intensifying with each encounter. I felt an emptiness within, yet simultaneously found myself ensnared in a harrowing cycle. After each clandestine meeting, I vowed it would be the last time I would abandon everything to return to David. attempting to repair what had been shattered. But the moment Martin's gaze locked onto mine and he drew near, those promises evaporated as if they had never been made. The cycle persisted until, inevitably, the secret I had fought so hard to conceal could no longer remain hidden. It was an ordinary afternoon when David announced his impending business trip, indicating he would be home late. I gave it little thought. As Martin approached me, we carried on with our affair, oblivious to the fact that David had returned home sooner than anticipated. Until the door to my room swung open. In that moment, it felt as though my entire world had crumbled. David stood silently at the door, not uttering a single word. He didn't scream or lash out as I had envisioned would happen if my secret came to light. Instead, he remained there, his gaze fixed on us, devoid of emotion. The warmth and affection I once saw in his eyes had vanished, replaced by confusion, hurt, and a profound sense of betrayal. I averted my gaze from David, my heart froze, and an overwhelming weight settled over me. I realized it was the end, all my fears and secrets had been laid bare. With no possibility of retreat, David remained silent, simply turning away and exiting the room, leaving a palpable void between Martin and me, where the tension hung thick in the air. Yet I found myself unable to move, frozen in place as that moment stretched on for eternity. As I understood that all that David and I shared was irreparably broken. The confrontation between David and me followed when he finally faced me. His anger exploded in a scream. He accused me. Not hesitating to point out my betrayal and selfishness, he said I had destroyed everything: the love, the trust, the family we had built together. I couldn't say a word to defend myself because everything David said was true. Every word he spoke was like a knife stabbing into my heart, reminding me of the wrong decisions I had made. I had destroyed not only my life but David's as well as Martin's, who was complicit in all this and could do nothing to appease David's anger. He said nothing but quietly backed away as if realizing that he could not change anything in this situation. His presence in the room only added to the suffocation and tension between us. The family I had once had that I had hoped would be strong was now completely broken. After the bitter confrontation, David could not bear it any longer. He left me, taking all the hurt and despair with him. The house we had shared was now empty. Everything in this house, every object, every memory reminded me of lost love and mistakes that I could never erase. Marin disappeared from my life after that without a word of farewell, without a trace. He left as if he had never existed. I was left alone in the cold house with a sense of guilt and pain that could not be healed. Every corner of the house echoed with painful memories and betrayal, reminding me of the price I had to pay for my wrong decisions. I was left with nothing but emptiness and despair. And I knew that I would never be able to forgive myself for what had happened from that moment on. My life was plunged into darkness. With each passing day, I found myself sinking further into a chasm of regret, ensnared by an overwhelming sense of pain and loneliness that had become an inseparable part of my existence. I realized, with a heavy heart, that I had lost everything. Feeling utterly trapped with no escape in sight,